In a previous presentation on the Voynich manuscript, I advanced the opinion that it may have an oracular background. I based this on the very structure of the text, and indeed the script, which displays a certain dualistic or binary foundation. Specifically, the script, and by extension the text, is formed of C-curves and backslashes, a system of curves and lines. I'm not sure how far this can be taken linguistically, but it is suggestive, I think, of some oracular operations. So I suggest that the text may have some oracular dimension. By this I mean that the author may have been in the habit of consulting an oracle, and this may be important to what the text is and what it is about. In particular, certain preoccupations with simple numerical divisions, as well as certain glyphs, suggest something like the operations of the divinatory art we call geomancy. In this presentation, I want to extend that suggestion. Geomancy is a method of divination, or a category of divinatory practices, by which one consults nature spirits, spirits that reside in and populate the landscape. Various forms were well known and widely practiced in the Renaissance. In fact, geomancy was listed as one of the forbidden arts, but this didn't curb its popularity. We can say that it was as popular as astrology in the relevant period. If the Voynich manuscript is from, say, the 1430s or thereabouts, then geomancy is unquestionably a normal part of the popular intellectual terrain and not at all out of place. The typical mode of conducting a geomantic operation involved making a series of random marks or squiggles on the earth in a sandbox or on some other surface representing the earth. The marks are then interpreted. In the best documented method, the marks would register as binary, odd or even. This would be recorded, and then another series of marks would be made, again registering as odd or even. A series of such operations thus created a series of odds and evens, then producing simple geometric figures depicting the various possibilities. In that case, these figures would then be interpreted, yielding the answer to the inquiry. In the usual arrangement, there were 16 such possibilities. This is how the oracle would be consulted. You ask the earth spirits a question. Their answer is supplied in the figures generated by making marks on the earth, then duly interpreted. This is what was usually required. The random marks were translated into symbols, and then the symbols were interpreted. In this picture, we see a Renaissance man engaged in geomancy. Notice the long stick. The method involves taking a long stick, holding it at the top so that you have little control over it, and then you make marks in the earth with the stick, and the marks will be necessarily irregular and haphazard. It is important that the querent, the augur, the person making the inquiry, cannot manipulate the formation of the marks. The long stick moves around on its own to some degree, and this is taken as the intervention of the earth spirits. The spirits, not the augur, draws the marks. The method depicted here involves attempting to write certain appropriate words or formulae or glyphs without proper control of the stick, and then an assessment is based on the errors and deviations and distortions of the script. As I say, there is then some set way by which you take the marks as representing odd and even, and this is mapped as a symbol from various binary possibilities, typically 16. My surmise is that the author of the Voynich manuscript used some such method. He has made his script, his character set, from binary possibilities. I propose then that he has made the script for the explicit purpose of recording information obtained through such methods. In which case, to fill out this line of thinking, I think the spirits he has consulted in this way are the nymphs depicted conspicuously in parts of the work. This is an admittedly arcane connection, but it is what the whole ensemble, such as it is, suggests to me. As well as the astrology evident in the work, I also detect geomancy. Geomancy, in fact, was not unconnected to astrology, and the various figures used, the 16 symbols typically, were given planetary and zodiacal attributions. Geomancy was, if anything, a branch of astrology. Many of the charts in the Voynich manuscript might be amenable to geomantic interpretation. I draw attention in particular to the chart with 4 sets of 17 or 18 symbols arranged to the 4 directions or 4 seasons as it appears. This chart is not astrological, rather it has the appearance of being geomantic. The nymphs in the manuscript, as I see it, reside in the mountain streams and lakes and pools, as well as in the heavens. There is a geomancy and earth science that goes with the astrology. Sociologically, geomancy was the popular choice of the rural and lower classes. Astrology was more highbrow and had greater respectability. Geomancy then would be a natural adjunct to more rustic and less professional forms of herbalism. But in the case of the Voynich manuscript, I think it is first and foremost a work of herb gatherers, and the rosette map that is a remarkable feature of the work indicates an intimate connection with the landscape, and by extension, I suggest, an intimacy with the spirits of the landscape, and specifically the nymphs of the mountain lakes, streams and springs, these being a crucial part of the alpine landscape, the mountain nymphs. As always, much depends upon the context you bring to these things. I place the work in a specific context: alpine northern Italy, the Dolomites, and the herbal folk traditions of that region, and an accompanying mountain cosmology with ancient roots. You can put the work in Belgium or Finland or Spain or Scotland or Russia or Mexico if you want. I insist that alpine northern Italy is the right context. To sketch a scenario in that context, our author consults the mountain nymphs of that landscape, known as the Gannes to the Ladin speakers, by geomantic means, and our manuscript is a record of such consultations, and knowledge obtained by, or confirmed by, informed by, such consultations. This would invite a very different reading of the manuscript as a whole, and a different approach to and understanding of the cryptic text of the work, which would in that case be in some way mantic. It might imply processes and manipulations of the text which are magical rather than linguistic in the first instance. We know that our author has assembled a script, a character set for this special purpose. The text itself has many strange or even bizarre characteristics. They might arise out of linguistic processes or cryptological processes, but also perhaps out of distinctly magical thinking. But magical, not mystico-visionary. It is not like Hildegard's language of fire, which is directly visionary in nature, rather obtained through a magical system, with geomancy being an essential component of that system. Also, such operations might conceivably include such linguistic phenomena as glossolalia, which might impact upon the very nature of the text and the way it was created. It has been suggested before as a way of explaining the linguistic perversities of the text. Eager students of the manuscript might, at this juncture, point out that this is mighty akin to the scrying reported by Dee and Kelly, whose names have been implicated at times in either the production or passage of the manuscript. Some process of generating supposedly angelic utterances. Perhaps so, superficially, but our manuscript is much earlier and from a different and more rustic context. Dee and Kelly perpetrated Elizabethan frauds founded by that time on a thoroughly debased and murky occultism. In any case, we might find several rather startling examples of a geomantic operation in the Voynich manuscript, namely in the so-called chicken scratches. These are strange, unexplained, crazy patterns imprinted into the vellum of several pages, seemingly with a nib or stylus or sharp implement. They seem to be under the ink of the text, in which case they were there from the outset, though this is unconfirmed. The scratchings in one case seem to be under the TO symbol. They are wild, indistinct scratching patterns. These are the sort of incoherent marks that make paleographers salivate and provoke the wildest of speculations. It must be Leonardo da Vinci's signature, say some. No, it's Roger Bacon's. No, it's John Dee's, and so on. The doodles of a drunken Armenian monk. At least the person who posted this interpretation admitted, I could be wrong. A flurry of flimsy theories have been advanced as to what these are and what caused them. The consensus, though, is that they have been made through human activity. If it is lettering, there's no explanation for why the lettering is so wild and distorted, and no explanation at all for the crossed lines of the vaguely geometric scribbles. Usefully, Peterson compares the scribbles to a child's drawing when he writes, "Someone with only partly developed motor skills who is beginning to recognise the shapes but doesn't fully have the hand-eye coordination to render it neatly." This is indeed the desired effect in geomantic operations, childlike receptivity. The partly developed motor skills is caused by holding the end of a stylus or long implement. So I can add an equally flimsy theory, but one that might nevertheless point us in the right direction and has the merit of contextual plausibility. It is accommodated by my overall account of the manuscript anyway. I suggest that these chicken scratchings are geomantic operations made upon the vellum. They are most likely made with a long implement, a long stylus, held at the top and then moved willy-nilly of its own accord upon the surface, inscribing a distorted pattern. That is how these scratchings seem to have been made, with a long pointed implement held at the top and moved with little control, producing a crazy pattern of jerks and twists. You can do it with a pencil on paper. Hold the pencil upright, vertical, loosely by the very top. Now let the pencil dance around on the paper, making random marks, or try to write your signature in this way. That's what we find in the Voynich manuscript on these pages. Chicken scratchings, or perhaps the marks of a geomantic divination. In that case, the surface of the vellum itself represents the earth, the theatre of divination, the field of possibilities. Certainly in later occultism, geomancy was practiced on paper. The method then would be to inscribe the sigils or names of the required spirits on the paper by way of invocation, or protective sigils or squares or circles would be used to ensure malignant spirits didn't intrude. It was essentially a folk magic. In most cases, conventions of figures and magical insignia once drawn upon the earth moved to the new technology of paper. We might suppose it moved to vellum before that. Similarly, pristine geomancy would be practiced outdoors, el natural, but it made a transition to indoor and urban settings, with the sigils and divination chalked on the floor. In this scenario, our author has, for whatever reason, used these pages, the vellum surface, to draw a geomantic scribble, using a long implement held loosely at the top. Since we have other reasons to think he may dabble in geomancy, these chicken scratches emerge possibly as divinations or the residues of divinations. I doubt this has not been suggested before, but the norms of geomancy are now thoroughly obscure, and we don't appreciate how common it was in the Renaissance period. At this stage, it's as good an explanation of these mysterious marks as any. To reiterate, our author, a herb gatherer by my account, is in the habit of consulting the spirits of the landscape, the mountain nymphs, by geomantic means. We might suppose it is an integral part of his herbal tradition, rustic, folkish and earthy. His tradition then is oracular in nature, or a body of herbal knowledge informed by oracular divination. The Voynich manuscript is some record or account of the same. These strange markings in the manuscript are the result of his indulgence in methods of divination. We should not consider this a strange or unreasonable eventuality. In traditional Chinese herbalism to this day, divination is an accepted method of diagnosis and prognosis. So it is in pre-modern medical systems generally. We understand well that astrology was woven into Renaissance medicine, but other divinatory tools were widely used on the fringes. Geomancy, as I say, was illicit, one of the forbidden arts, like necromancy, consulting the spirits of the dead. Consulting the spirits of the land and mountains, the wild places, was frowned upon by official medicine and by the church, but by all accounts widely practiced. The fact that it was made illegal tells you that it was widely practiced. Indeed, this earth-based mode of divination fell foul of the authorities and is exactly the sort of practice demonised during the witch hunts which began in Italy around this time and for a long time after. Geomancy was driven underground and in that sense became, properly speaking, occult, with sinister associations. In fact, what happened was the earth was sundered from the sky and astrology survived without any direct correlate to the earth. In the early modern period, Western esotericism was cleansed of various folk elements, demonised as witchcraft, and things like Elizabethan magic are urban reconstructions stripped of so-called low magic. Geomancy, we might also say, was originally, and for obvious reasons, an adjunct to alchemy, since alchemy concerns the ores of the earth. But in that case the spirits invoked would be the dwarves and elves that dwell in and mine metals and gems deep in the mountains. That's the geomancy of treasure hunters. Whereas what we have is the geomancy of herb gatherers. This mode of divination consults the mountain nymphs who are part of the same folklore. The so-called chicken scratches do not tell us anything about the Voynich text or script or language, or not directly. They're not primitive, meaningful text, not codes or keys, not Arabic back to front. On the contrary, they are exactly scribbles, made very deliberately in a very particular way. One explanation is that they are divinatory marks from some oracular geomantic operation conducted upon the vellum sheet. Why on these sheets? I don't know. Are these pages special in some way? I don't know. But the scratchings require some explanation along with everything else in the work. Many things in the Voynich manuscript might make more sense if we suppose that our author, our herbalist, our herb gatherer, employed some method of geomancy as an integral part of his practice. As far as Voynichese goes, to speculate further, it may, in view of all this, be some type of invented language consisting of a systematic lexicon, and words may be generated by mapping characters from a geomantic grid or some system of geomantic correspondences, because frankly it has that appearance. It has been proposed that it is a nonsense text generated by a card and grill method as a hoax, a money-making scheme. But a similar card and grill effect might be the result not of a hoax, but of a divinatory system. The map, the rosette folio, is of singular importance in my account. It tells us that this book, its herbs and nympha, is about a particular landscape. I propose that some method of communing with the spirits of this landscape, some geomancy, folkish but sophisticated with astrological correspondences, is integral to what we encounter in the Voynich manuscript as a whole. How, though, does a rustic herb gatherer who chats with nymphs through squiggles, recording an essentially oral heritage of herb and mountain lore, produce something as apparently literate and complex as the Voynich manuscript? That's another question.